While I know you probably just clicked on this video to figure out how to fix your magic ring, magic circle, whichever one you call it, especially in these plushy chenille yarns that really tend to stick on themselves and sometimes even break as you're trying to close up this ring and start your circular amigurumi or whatever it is that you're making, I really hope you stick around because I have 5 tips in total to level up your crochet. And if you're a knitter, don't click off just yet because I think you'll find that tips 1, 3, and 5 might help you out the most. And I'll make sure there's chapters down below so that way if you are a knitter and you just want to grab those tips, you can. But before I help you fix your magic rings, I wanted to start out at the very beginning of all crochet, and that is your slip knot. And I know this is going to sound incredibly lame and like, how is this even going to help me level up my crochet? It is a very tiny portion, but it is how we start all of our projects. And that is the orientation in which you actually make your slip knot. And where this can actually really make a difference is if you are, instead of doing a magic ring, maybe you're doing a chain 2, a chain 4, or anything like that, and using that chain as your foundation for that ring, or even just in general, so that way it doesn't loosen up on you. It is actually the orientation in which you make your slip knot. And does it really matter, especially if you weave your end in right away? Probably not, but this is just something I figured out over the years that helps keep it nice and even with the rest of the chains on the stitch. What I noticed is when I orient my slip knot to make that very first chain, so that way it's not the tail that controls how much that loop expands or contracts, and I actually make it the other way around. And sometimes I will make a slip knot more than once because do I actually remember which way I'm turning it every single time to get the right end of the yarn to be what controls the loopness of it? No, I don't remember. You would think I would after this amount of time. And I think by and large, I do just pick it up and do it. But there are times where I stop myself and I start to overthink it. And honestly, it really only takes what, like not even probably 3 seconds to make a slip knot. So if I have to make it more than once just to make sure that it's not the tail end that is what's controlling how loose or snug that first chain is, I'm just going to take the time to do it because it really is nothing in the scheme of all of the crocheting and knitting that I do. And I tend not to use this one so much in knitting because I guess probably maybe I do, but because the cast on goes all the way on your knitting needle, I haven't really had an issue with that, but probably out of habit, I do it anyway. I don't know. I've never actually thought to check myself. And I guess there might be a use case for that. Probably especially if you are using like a back loop cast on, which I personally cannot stand. I have never been good at making it even. I almost always do the long tail cast on in knitting. So that's why I really haven't worried about how my slip knot is in knitting. So I guess that one's mostly for the crocheters, unless you are also a knitter and you can think of a use case for why you would want to make sure that the tail is not the one that's controlling it. And as we continue our crocheting, one of the tips that I heard, I want to say it was last year, and I don't know why I was so late to the game on this. And I do think this is one of the more popular tips with the rise of crochet since 2020. And that is instead of using that chain loop across in the little V's, the way that most of us older crocheters probably learned, it's the way it was depicted in like Crochet World and every crochet book under the sun as I was growing up at least. But I think with the rise in popularity in crochet, a lot of people have figured out if you use the back bar instead of one of the V loops, then that gives you a little bit nicer of an edge and it looks a lot like your ending row. So that way they look pretty much the same and you can't really tell necessarily which one is your foundation and which one is your ending row. And it does produce a nicer edge. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. What was the last thing that I didn't do that on? I feel like the last thing I did not do that for, and I've done it actually both ways for this particular project, and that is the Water Lily top by Olga Poltava. On the pink version, I did the back bar because I knew I was going to have to pick up for ribbing, and I thought it made it pretty nice. I did not do it that way on my orange version, and then I kind of wish I had because it really did make it so much easier to pick up that other edge. So I guess there's more than one reason. So if you have to pick up somewhere else in that square, it does make it easier. And I think especially for seaming things up, like putting together granny squares or anything like that, I feel like having those nice crochet V edges just really helps elevate that experience, because I hate sewing, and so if I can make it any easier, I will. But I feel like that's probably a lot more popular, and if you've already heard it, I'm sorry, but I'm going to put it out there anyway because I was late to the party on it, and that means probably somebody else is as well. Tip number 3 is for both the knitters and the crocheters. So knitters, if you were sticking around because, well, you just wanted to listen and you didn't want to fast forward, first of all, thank you, because I appreciate it, and that you just want to hang out and listen anyway. And that is to use stitch markers on your starting chain, or for the knitters is for your cast on. So what that means is if you have to chain or cast on something like 200, which is a lot, and then you don't want to have to, like, I don't know, count it about 11 billion times and then come up with a different count every time, and then you finally think you have it and then you don't because you miscounted on the last time, and then just put stitch markers at like a specific interval. So for me, it's usually every 20 stitches or 25 stitches, depending on how much of a chain or how much cast on I actually have to do. For the knitters, you get lucky. You can use whichever style stitch marker you want to use because they work. Obviously, for the crocheters, you're going to want to use the kind that are locking or the split type of stitch markers, which I personally don't enjoy those. I don't know if I have a reason. I just use the locking stitch markers, and then that way I know I can count it. For sure I have 20. The next section is going to be 20. The next section is going to be 20. So that way you're not risking losing count at 68. And then you think you know where you're at, but you're not. And then you have to start all over again, or you talk yourself into you have the right counts, but you don't. And then you start the project anyway. And then when you start your first row, you're like, something's wrong. And it's because, you know, you couldn't count. So to me, it just has saved me so much more time that if I know I'm going to have to cast on or start a chain of more than probably 40 or 50, I'm just going to go ahead and throw stitch markers on at a certain interval that makes sense to me. And it just goes so much easier and saves so much time and headache down the road. You probably thought I was going to make you wait until the last tip to fix our magic rings, and no, I'm not going to make you wait till the very end. This is tip number 4, and this is more specific to the plushy chenille yarns. And as you can see, this chenille is really just wanting to wrap up on itself and is giving me a really hard time wanting to pull it through. And I'm glad this finally happened to me because I've wanted to make this video for a while, but I don't know, when you try to get a magic ring to not work out for you, that's when it suddenly works. And so because I was like, whatever, and I'm just going to get started and I'm not going to film, that's when it decides it's going to not work. And so I saved this. One of the first things is when you're making one of these plushy magic rings, I know because we're making amigurumi and we are going to be putting stuffing into them, the tendency is going to want to be to make everything as tight as possible, especially these first 6 or 8 stitches, depending on what your magic ring calls for. And then you're probably hanging on to it for dear life, and then you're actually creating more of your own resistance by doing that. So typically the first 1 or 2 stitches, I will try to do a little bit looser, and you can see this is actually starting to budge now. I thought I was actually kind of on the tight side, and it's starting to budge now that I've loosened up and loosened my grip up and kind of played with them a little bit. But if you happen to have an acrylic yarn strand in a similar color, and I've actually have I used completely contrasting colors to prove whether it would work or not? I don't know. But if you see me using completely contrasting colors just to prove a point or disprove my point, I don't know which way I'm going to go with this. Anyway, I'm going to try to demonstrate this with also, not matching. I mean, these don't actually match, but they're close enough that if you think about what a magic ring is, it really is just a beginning of like you're tying something, right? And I'm breaking this down simply. I am starting out as if I was tying. I'm just going to do that again. I have way too much yarn strand for this. So it is literally just making this loop right here where you're just kind of wrapping a little bit around. And then I will just start crocheting with the other yarn around this. So that's all you're going to need. And guess what? You'll be able to cinch it up nice and tight and makes life so much easier. And then you're not worried about whether the chenille is going to stick on itself. Obviously, I didn't do it for that one because I was feeling lazy and I didn't want to dig out a piece of cream colored yarn. Joke's on me. I had to do it anyway because this one wants to be a pain in the rear end. So I'm going to have to restart that anyway, especially since in my attempt to pull the snot out of it, I almost broke that starting like, and yeah, it's not looking great. So not that it really matters because it will get woven in or stuffed inside the plushie anyway, but it's just a way to make life easier, especially once you go up to like the Bernat blanket. Don't be afraid to use acrylic inside there. It is incredibly strong. The Bernat blanket is not stronger necessarily than your acrylic yarn unless you're making a plushie for the Tasmanian Devil, in which case your yarn probably does not stand a chance anyway. That was just something I figured out on my own. I know I'm not the only person who has thought of that. I just got frustrated. I think I was using probably Bernat blanket anyway. And I just was like, there's got to be a better way. And really, it's just a loop that I'm about to tie and be able to snug up and make the nice ring to get this plush started. And so that's what I've been doing for, well, obviously not all of my plushies because, you know, there was this, but that was me being lazy and not wanting to dig out, you know, another strand of acrylic yarn. So that's on me. And now I've had to teach myself this is why we just spend that little bit of extra time in the beginning to do it the better way, and then, you know, it goes so much better. But I also know sometimes in the moment, or if you're traveling or whatever, and you don't have that extra piece of acrylic, or I don't know, you just don't have extra acrylic on you, just loosen up that very first round. I promise once you snug that fully up, the stuffing isn't going to go anywhere if you're using a hook size enough down from the recommended hook size for that particular yarn. I hope that really made sense to someone. But as long as your hook size in general is not going to produce a super loose fabric, that first round is not going to make or break how much stuffing is going to poke through. Obviously, if it continues and you're still poking through, then you've gotten a little bit out of control with being too loose and you might need to go down in your crochet hook anyway. Just don't feel like those first couple of stitches of that beginning round need to be as tight as humanly possible, because really they don't, especially for the plush yarns. They are actually, because they're so dense, pretty forgiving. And if you're not working in the round and you're like, okay, but how do I neaten up my edges? Because they look like a hot mess. And I'm actually going to have to create a swatch that is doing this, I don't want to say the wrong way, but like the not leveled up way, because I have learned to do this. I don't know if it's something that I thought of on my own because I've been doing this for so long, or if I saw an article or something. This was definitely before I was really into like watch YouTube for everything at the time. But that's how long I've been doing this, is when you're working flat and you're looking at your edges and they're straight, but they're not. You can just tell there's an inconsistency there. And what I noticed is I really wasn't ever paying attention to which way I was turning my work. Now, does it actually matter whether I'm flipping it like a book or whether I'm flipping it like an Arabic book or Hebrew? Is it? I can't remember the opposite. It doesn't matter which way I flip it. To me, flipping it like a book was the most intuitive. So by flipping my work the same orientation every time, it's like magic for how simple it is that suddenly your edges line up. And it's crazy because when you first start doing it and you're making that concerted effort of like, I'm gonna flip it, and you have to like actively think about it as you're coming up at the end of the row and you're getting ready to flip. The first one or two projects, maybe depending on how large they are, it might feel a little bit like, but I have to remember to do this. And it might feel annoying, but once it becomes second nature, let me tell you, when your edges just start looking nice all of the time, it makes a huge difference. And that is for both knitting and crocheting. The only flaw I have is with knitting, and that is if I had set it down for a little bit, I'm not necessarily sure when I pick it up if which way to... I ended on. I don't know if that's making sense. I really don't know. But at least in crocheting, if you're like, okay, but I'm not sure necessarily, first of all, you could just try it if it's a small row. And then if it doesn't look right, you go back and rip it out. But there is actually a way, if you really, really, really want to level up and be able to tell which way that final ending loop on is on your last row when you set it down is if you look really, really closely, it should not cross over. So if you see the two strands down at that last chain or, well, double crochet, single crochet, whatever it was that you made, if you're looking down in there and they seem crossed over, that is incorrect. It just takes a minute or two, not even, it takes seconds to just go ahead and flip it a little bit to open it up and get the correct orientation of that, the loop that you're getting ready to turn your, oh my gosh, turn your row on. So it really just takes a matter of seconds to figure out, hey, these are crossed over, let me uncross them, and then pick that loop up with your crochet hook, turn your work, or chain and turn your work, whichever one that the designer has said. That is the other thing I have learned too, is in that row turning is, yes, I'm turning it the same direction every single time, but I do exactly what the designer says, whether it's chain and turn or whether it's turn and chain. And I don't know why it makes a difference, but it does. I know it sounds ridiculous that I'm going this granular, but I mean, you came here to level up your crochet, and these are just some of those little finer points that feel very just tedious, but once you start doing them and you get the hang of them and they become second nature, I promise your crochet and knitting are going to look so much better. And I hope you found at least one tip here today that helped you level up your crocheting or your knitting. And as always, I am so glad that you decided to join me today in my Northeast Ohio home where fall is here, daylight savings time has ended, and it's dark in shortly. So I really enjoyed hanging out with you today and just giving you a few tips and tricks that I'm hoping really help you. And as always, I cannot wait to visit with you in the next one. But if you want to hang out a little bit longer, you'll find something here that I hope you'll enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.